We are going to be continuing today with the seed module of our program. And specifically for today, we are going to look at writing a research concept note or paper. So the general idea of the presentation is to help provide some guidance on how you can move from your research idea towards having a final product. So how do you move from a research question into something that is more tangible and that covers the idea? And so this is different from a protocol. This is different from a proposal, as we will see in a couple of minutes. So for our session today, we are going to cover these 6 key items. We'll look at what the concept note is, why it matters, when and how to use under the different types, what the core components are. We'll look at some examples, and then we are going to conclude. By the end of the session, we hope that you should be able to understand the purpose and value of a research concept note, to identify and describe the key components of a research concept note, to differentiate between the different types of concept notes and their applications, and lastly, use a concept note to guide the development of a full research proposal. So what is this concept note? So it is a concise document that outlines a research idea. It can be as thin as a single page, but typically it ranges somewhere between 2 to 5 pages. So you can think about it like some form of a mini protocol or a little bit of an expansion of the outline as we saw in the last lecture last week. And these concept notes are very important because they help the researchers to organize their thoughts, and it's a means to seek feedback either from collaborators or maybe from funding bodies. And these concept notes also act as somehow some sort of a precursor to a full research proposal. So we can say on that spectrum from idea towards your project, you start with an idea, and the next iteration is to develop it into a concept note. From here, you bounce it around with colleagues and get feedback, and then you develop into a proposal, and then you implement your proposal to get your project implementation. From there, you can write your paper or your publications and get the deliverables. And we're going to look at these 8 important reasons why concept notes can be very, very valuable. The first is that they are very useful for clarification and for developing ideas. So instead of spending so much time to start writing the full concept, you just can start with a research concept note. And this concept note, because you write it, you are going to think, and thinking helps you to clarify the idea, to see the validity of it, and to see it in its entirety. So it's a very useful way to basically think through writing. Secondly, they are very useful for strategic planning and decision making. So if you want to develop a research idea, it might be nice to think about the other far-reaching implications, like how is this going to influence decisions down the line? And starting early with a concept note can help you integrate both strategic thinking and the long-term implications of that work, and to incorporate them early on and to see whether those are ideas that you need to retain or you need to abandon them. The third reason is that these, as we had mentioned earlier, are really the foundation for detailed proposals. So it's nice to outline things in a more compact way before you develop them. It also helps you to refine the ideas and lay them out in a very nice way. They are also really great for beginning academic and research initiatives. One key application of a concept notes that is quite popular is with PhD applications. In many schools and many institutions, PhD applicants are required to submit an academic research outline or concept note of what they would like to do for their PhD. I did this when I was applying for my PhD. And for us, you had to apply a concept which is an outline, a 5-page concept, and approved by a supervisor. So you secure a supervisor, secure a research project before you apply. And so this is quite common practice in a good number of universities. They're also useful because, like we said, they're very important in developing your proposal and in evaluating them. So, for example, you're in a department and the department funds have funds available. You might want to just outline the idea first, and they tell you whether this is something that you should spend more time doing, work on, or this is an idea we should just abandon. And they're also great for collaboration and gathering feedback. I think this is quite a straightforward one. This is a way that you get ideas from your colleagues, from your supervisors. It's also a nice way to initiate collaborations. Like you can want to collaborate with an institution or with an individual, and you send them a concept of what you want you guys to collaborate on. At least on those bases, they will see whether this is something that is feasible, or this is something worth investing some time and energy on. The next component is resource allocation and risk management. I think this is also very important. Before you liberate funds to a researcher, it might be nice to see what that research is actually going to look like before you just give money and say go work on whatever idea you want. It might be nice to have at least a compact sense of what that is and whether it's what the resources, and resources are with for resume ideas, because as you look at these ideas, you tend to think about these ideas very clearly when you outline them. So let's now look at the different types of concept notes. And we have 4 key different types here. These are not really hard categories. So I'm categorizing them here for the purpose of understanding particularly their purpose. And we have 4 key columns here, the purpose of each, you intend it for, what the core focus of that concept note should be, and when you can use such a concept note. So let's start with the first one, a preliminary type concept note. So what do you use this for? Usually as an exploration and refining your ideas. So let's say you have a research question. The next thing you might want to do is look at what methods am I going to use? What are the bases? What do we know about from the literature? How am I going to collect data and so on? So it's a nice next step after you get your research question to outline it. And usually you would write this for your colleagues, for your mentors, for your supervisors, so that they can give early feedback before you spend more time. And usually, these preliminary type research concepts are usually focusing on the basic research question. You are refining it as you're thinking about it and whether it is really valuable for you to pursue that question and use it at the idea stage so that you can get some initial feedback. The next type is the funding type concept. And these are usually pitches for grant opportunities. And you write this in such a way that it's almost like a sale pitch. You're making a strong case for why you should be funded. And your audience will be funders, review panels for from different funding agencies. And the focus is on key aspects that make you stand out, such as the innovation that your research brings, the feasibility and concreteness, and the potential impact that your research can add to the research community or in practice. And you use this often before major grant submissions. There are many funding agencies that have money available, and sometimes they can ask um, investigators to send in some ideas, and they can give you early feedback on whether this is something that you should spend more time developing and whether there is a potential for funding. The third type of concept note is the collaborative type, or the collaboration concept note. So the purpose of this is to actually build research partnerships. So you are sending this to people you want to potentially work with, such as your collaborators in your field, institutions that are around the area of interest. And you want to write this concept sheet in such a way that you focus on the synergistic aspects, what you people have in common, where you guys have a shared vision, where you guys can potentially collaborate, the kind of resources that people can bring together to move that idea ahead. And you use it when you're getting to people probably who are a little bit outside your area of expertise, or when you need support from some other individual or agency. The fourth type is the protocol development type, which is actually as a key preliminary step for laying groundwork for a full proposal. And so the intention is to share this with research teams, your colleagues. You can prepare this for the ethics committee to tell you whether this is really something ethical early on. And the focus here is on the research methodology and how you're going to practically implement your protocol or your study. And you use it before writing the protocol and before preparing something to submit or to the ethics committee. So these are the different four types and the way that you can think about uh, preparing them. So let's move on to what the core components of a concept note would be. And note that these core components can be organized in different ways and under different types of research concepts, the flow of the different sections will be different. And so these are not prescriptive or like a hard way that you must always organize. So the first is the title, and like a paper, like a full proposal, you always want to have a very clear title that captures the essence of the research idea. The title should be specific, not too broad, not too vague. It should ideally reflect who the study population is, the location or setting, and what the key focus will be. We're going to look at an example or two examples so that you see how these titles, effective titles, can really make an impactful concept note. The second component that follows from the after the title is the background. And in the background, you want to capture these three key elements, at least these three key elements always. The problem statement. What is the research gap or the challenge that your research intends to address? What is the context from literature? What do we know? Where you give a brief overview of what is already known and what remains unknown. And what remains unknown or unclear is the research gap, and this has to be very clear. And then often at the end, you have to justify. So you provide a rationale. Why is this study needed, and particularly now? And why is it relevant in your context? So in this section, you want to demonstrate that you understand the field or the topic and you provide sufficient motivation for pursuing your research question. So the third component after the background would to provide the objectives and the aims. So you can have a primary objective or your main research question. And I use objective and research question here interchangeably because you can phrase each of them almost in the order. And you can also have more than one objective. So you have secondary research objectives or multiple research objective. And these are probably additional research questions that you would like to explore alongside the main one. The next thing is to outline your specific aims. And these specific aims, you have to ensure that they are smart. We covered this in the first module, which we looked at objectives, research questions, and so on. And depending on whether you'll be doing some hypothesis testing, it might be nice to clearly outline the hypothesis that you are going to be exploring. The fourth component after the objectives and aims will be your research methodology. And these key four aspects are a must. You might have some kind of studies that are not outlined in this way, but for a typical research project in health sciences, you often have this as a key component. So you must take the study design. What type of study are you going to conduct? Is it a quantitative, qualitative, mixed study? Is it a prospective cohort? What is the design? The second component in the methodology is the population and the setting. Who are you going to study and where are you going to study them? So the PICOT framework can help you get this very clearly. So the data collection methods as well, they're very important. How are you going to gather data? How are you going to collect it from the participants? And how are you going to store this data? And then, of course, you must outline your data analysis plan. How do you plan to conduct the analysis, and how are you going to interpret results? So what are statistical tests are you using? How are you going to summarize measures? And how is the interpretation going to look like? And then very importantly, you must also clearly outline any ethical concerns. So how are you going to get ethical approval? Which committee are you going to be submitting it to? Do you even need ethical approval? Are you going to obtain informed consent, and what are the modalities that go into that? Are you going to protect the data? So what are the privacy and confidentiality implications? And how do you guarantee the safety of the research participants? The fifth component is the outcomes and the impact. So this is very important because it's also one of those things that you put out there to justify your study. Is your selling point. So, and the outcomes or the impact can be in different ways. You have to demonstrate the scientific contribution that your research will bring. How will your study advance knowledge in the field? How will it help to maybe fill a gap or something? And what are the practical implications? So these are the real world, the potential real world benefits of application of your research. And what are the policy relevant implications as well? How findings might influence decision making after you publish your findings. And in terms of innovations, you should bring this out. What are the novel aspects from your approach? And the last aspect of your concept note is resources and timeline. So you must state the key budget estimate. So here you are not going to be putting all the information that is in your Excel sheet, which is your separate budgeting sheet, but you want to bring the key budget lines, the major cost categories, and you outline them and you just put them in a simple table. The next is the personnel needs. Who are the team members that are part of this project? What is their role? What exactly are they going to do? You have the principal investigators, the co-investigators, sub-investigators, data collectors, data managers, and all the different key stakeholders that we have in a typical research project. And what is their expertise? And how are these people suitable to ensure that this study rolls out very well? You must also ensure to include the timeline. So you do this often by including a Gantt chart with key milestones and how long each of these milestones is going to last. And then you also mention some feasibility assessment. Why is this project doable? I mean, you can have fancy and lofty ideas, but if they are not feasible, then they are not fundable and they should not be pursued. So you must demonstrate to your colleagues, your collaborators, and your potential funders that this is something that is feasible. So now that we've looked at the core outline, let's look at this example. And this is actually from an ongoing project that we are working on at the moment. And it's entitled A Scientometric Analysis of HIV/AIDS Research in Cameroon. So we want to kind of do some bibliometric analysis of the current landscape of the literature on HIV research in Cameroon. And from this title, you can see that it's clear, it's concise, it's quite descriptive, and it specifies the research area, HIV/AIDS, the methods that we are using, scientometric analysis, and the setting or the geographical scope. So just from the title alone, someone can have a very good sense of what the rest of the topic is. So always try to get a title that is quite clear and that captures the essence of your work. And you can also notice that from this very title, you kind of get a sense of what the study purpose is and what the context is in general. So let's look at the next segment of our concept, the background. So we wrote a very brief background, but we tried to capture the key components. And for this study, we argue that despite ongoing efforts to combat the HIV/AIDS epidemic, there is still a critical need for understanding of the state of HIV/AIDS research in Cameroon. Previous studies have highlighted the importance of evaluating research output, collaboration networks, and emerging trends to inform policy decisions and resource allocation strategies. However, there are few reviews of HIV/AIDS research in Cameroon, especially those that use scientometric approaches. Scientometric analysis is a valuable method for assessing the volume, scope, and trends of research conducted in specific regions or countries. By conducting a scientometric and evaluation of HIV/AIDS research in Cameroon, this study aims to improve our understanding of the current state of research, identify research gaps, and inform future research directions and policy decisions in the fight against HIV/AIDS. So in this background, we include the problem statement, we include some context from literature, what we know, and so on. We outline the gap and we explain the rationale. We could really go further. This is quite brief. You could go further, but I think the idea of a concept note is to actually communicate to someone at least the minimum of the key idea and the reason and what the problem is, why it's important, what gap are you trying to fill, and so on. So this is an example of a very brief background that, which is an example of what a brief concept background could look like. The next component will be the aims and the objectives. So here we provide the more general objective or the aim, and then we provide the specific aims or the specific objectives. And we have here 5 of the specific aims that we want to capture here. And for each specific aim, you try to ensure that it is smart. So we saw this in module 1, ensure it is specific, is measurable, is achievable, is relevant, and is time bound. And for this concept, we want to generally describe the trends in HIV/AIDS research, including how many publications per year and how it has been changing over time, to identify and evaluate key journals that are publishing research from our setting, looking at the publication frequency, the impact factor, the citation frequencies, H-index, and so on. We also want to assess the author productivity by looking at the best authors that have contributed to HIV/AIDS research in Cameroon, analyzing co-authorship patterns and collaborative networks among our co-authors. We also want to identify the leading research institutions in HIV research in Cameroon, look at their productivity, collaboration networks, and the impact. And lastly, to describe the patterns of international collaborations, how Cameroonian researchers and our colleagues outside Cameroon, how they collaborate, identify the countries that we collaborate the most with, and the kind of publications that we participate together. So the next aspect is the methods. And in the methods, this is quite different from a typical original primary research. And we outline it in a way that kind of resembles a systematic review because they are all secondary research methods. So here, the study design is scientometric analysis, and we are going to be searching a database and obtaining some key data that we are going to analyze. And these are bibliometric indicators, metadata like author names, titles, abstracts, and so on. And our data source is going to be, as outlined here briefly, Web of Science, but at this stage, we're thinking about potential of including other databases like PubMed and Scopus. And we outline here our inclusion criteria. What type of papers do we want to include? We want to include exclusively studies that are around HIV/AIDS research that are done in Cameroon, only in Cameroon, and articles that are published in peer-reviewed journals, publications within uh, from the beginning, from the first publication on HIV/AIDS in Cameroon up till 2024 when we designed this concept. And then we also outlined some exclusion criteria as well. Some other aspects of the methods are data collection. How are we going to obtain the data? With the way that we are going to prompt the database, our search terms, how are we going to, what kind of data we are going to extract? We identify the items that we'll be interested in. And we also specify the data analysis methods here. We're going to use bibliometric analysis methods. We're going to use network analysis methods and the software VOS viewer for it. And we also intend to do some keyword and cluster analysis. So we describe briefly how we're going to all of that. This is not particularly very, very mandatory because we are getting secondary data, but we, however, still mention it. And we also touch particularly on the idea that we ensure that all the sources are cited appropriately. And the fourth component for our concept note was the outcomes and impact. And we tried to outline the key outcomes or deliverables that this study could put out there and how they could contribute to science and potentially research practice. And we end by trying to make a case for why this is important. And we say the findings of this study will provide valuable insights into the current state of HIV/AIDS research in Cameroon, and that by identifying the research gaps and the collaboration patterns, this study will inform future research directions, policy decisions, and ultimately contributing to more effective strategies in the fight against HIV/AIDS in Cameroon. So that is an example. Now, I have also prepared some checklists that you could use after you prepared yours. And we have three categories of checklist items. The first is the content quality. Is the research question clear and focused? Does your background demonstrate understanding of the topic? You don't have so much space, but in that short space, you have to at least demonstrate that you understand the topic that you want to pursue. Are the methods appropriate for the objectives? So the research question or the objectives would be really matched very well to the methods. And we saw this in the module on translating research questions and objectives into study design. And the significance level, you have to articulate that very well. And you also have to demonstrate that this is quite feasible. So when you write your concept, check if each of these is answered. The next is from a strategy standpoint, and this is particularly relevant for those research concept note types that involve looking for collaborators, soliciting funding, and bouncing ideas around with funders and other people, or maybe to a supervisor. Ensure that it aligns with the supervisor or the funder priorities. Build it on that it builds on your existing expertise. So you have to show that you are the right person or the team is the right team for that. And you have to demonstrate that your timelines are realistic and that the resources that you propose to be used are feasible. And you have to outline clear next steps. And lastly, you have to also think about the presentation of the work. Ensure that you format it very well, spacing, a font, and all of that should not have issues. Error-free writing, we've covered this extensively. There should be some logical flow across sentences and across sections. Try to keep the length quite concise. Professor Sogby always encourages like you start with the one page, but if a one page is too dense, you can do a two page, but usually avoid exceeding 5 pages. And you should also include some contact information there if you need them to reach out to you. So in conclusion, a concept note clarifies and validates your research ideas. It includes essential components like the title, the problem, the objectives, the methods, and the outcomes. And you have to ensure that you tailor it to your audience. And one nice tip is that try to use like a visual or a table to summarize ideas. They are easy to understand and they often compress ideas very well. And try to practice and get feedback so that you can improve. It's an iterative process. The key take home here is that the best concept notes aren't perfect from the start. They are refined through feedback, revision, and continuous improvement. Before I end, I think there are a number of people here who are involved in the idea study. So I'll just quickly show an example of a concept sheet or concept note that template that we use in IDEA from an ongoing study that we have. So what we have here is the template that we use in IDEA. And this is an example of a concept sheet that we developed. And the project title is Sex Differences in Hypertension Among People Living with HIV Evidence from IDEA Cohort Study in Cameroon. And unlike the other concept that I showed, we actually start by stating the specific objectives and aims and so on. And I think this is also a very nice way to start so that people can just know exactly what you want to study before you explain why it's important and so on. So note that the way that you present the different aspects or components of a concept are quite variable, and you have to think about the audience and maybe the particular institution that you are going to be sharing it with to look at how you can organize it. So there's no hard recommendation for it. So we then have the background and the significance. So this covers the rationale, what we know in literature, what the gaps are, and so on. And then we have the study population, which is part of the methods. who the study participants are, the inclusion and exclusion criteria. And then a very key component for this kind of studies is the outcome variable. You must clearly define what the outcome variable is, how it is measured, or how you will measure it. And if there are really standard methods for assessing the outcome, you have to outline them, and also the data collection tools for assessing that outcome. Also mention the covariates or the independent variables that you're going to be using, define them very clearly so that people can understand. And then specific study designs, the cross-sectional analysis, the prospective cohort study, or whatever analysis method. And then you have to give the detailed statistical analysis plan. And you can see here that we describe descriptive statistics, we describe how we are going to compare groups, so bivariate analysis. We also describe both univariable and multivariable analysis that we're going to use to investigate associations, and also other tests, statistical tests, and so on. So for IDEA, you have to specify the country from Central Africa IDEA for which you'll be getting the data. And this was only for Cameroon specific data. We also have some ethics related checklists here. We must be clear about ethics related aspect. And then goals and timelines. We put a Gantt chart here. Then additionally, we have a small table here with all the variables and the way that they are captured in our questionnaire. So that's just a brief overview of our IDEA concept sheet. So I am going to stop here, and thank you all for your keen attention.